All right.
I just happened to notice that.
Well, good evening, everyone.
So much better.
Welcome to RATPAC. Tonight's session is Beginner's Guide to HF, week number 3. I'm Anthony Luscre, KZT.
And I'm Dennis Kidder, W6DQ.
My contact information is kzt@awl.net, and I have a website at k8zt.com.
And of course, I don't have a website, but I do have contact information up there. W6DQ@awl.net is perfect, but I'm also Collins user at yahoo.com.
Tonight's session, the PDF will be posted with a link from the RATPAC site, but if you'd like to follow along or if you'd like access to the full slideshow, tiny.cc/bghf. The session is packed with links. You'll see this little symbol, or you'll see the serif font in italicized. That lets you know that there is a link when we click on that you can get resources. So tonight we're going to talk about setting up your radio, HF challenges, and computers in the Radio Shack, and what else you need to do HF. And we'll be dividing it up between Dennis and myself. And I'm going to hand it over to Dennis to begin the thing.
All right. Okay. So big question, where do you put your Radio Shack? And I love this. Shack is a term of endearment used by hams, but it really predates hams. It goes back to the early days of wireless and Spark. And essentially Spark stations were pretty noisy and obnoxious. And so you wanted them to be away from where people were. So they tended to be in an outbuilding somewhere. If it was a shore station or on a ship, they'd actually build a wooden shack on the deck somewhere. And that's where the term Radio Shack came from. So you can see here's a fella probably in the, I would guess in the 20s, maybe, from the nature of the equipment he's using, maybe the late teens. That's his Radio Shack. But it always refers to where your radio and other equipment that's associated with your radio are installed. It can be in your house, it can be in a garage, it can be in an outside shed, it can be in a separate building from your home like it is here. It can be within your home, basements, spare rooms, attics, dens, etc. They all work great as your Radio Shack. It has to be someplace where you've got space. So if your space is limited, or you have other issues like your family doesn't want to see your Radio Shack or your radio station, I love this roll top desk. This is beautiful. A station in a roll top desk. It's wonderful. I had a station in a closet when I was a kid, so it was out of sight. But enclosed storage, it's safe and secure. It keeps the kids away. It keeps the pets away. The picture in the middle is a friend of my wife, Lisa, and mine, who is now a silent key. That's K5PZ, Pete Ziliux. And that's one of his Collins S-line stations, and a beautiful console, beautiful piece of furniture that was suitable for putting in your living room back in the day. And of course, that last photograph is a rack full of equipment, and there's no shortage of stuff like that around here in my shack. But these are common ways of dressing up your shack, dressing up your station, concealing it so that it's not out where your family can see it and complain about that unsightly Radio Shack.
Well, my first shack as a shortwave listener before I got my license was in my basement bedroom closet. I had a sliding door and I was able to use that. And my first antenna was tacked on the floor joist above my head in the basement. My first amateur Radio Shack, as we'll see a little bit later, was actually a portable case that I could take out of the closet and put on the desk.
Well, mine was my bedroom as a kid on a desk, but I did eventually move stuff into a closet and kept it out of sight. So these are some considerations the things you might want to take into consideration where you're going to put your Radio Shack, especially noise and privacy. If you have a full household with family, kids, what have you, noise can always be an issue. Not just the noise that you're going to generate with your station, but the noise coming from your family. The radio can be noisy and it can be obnoxious listening to that thing all the time. And I know I've had complaints about that from family members in the past, but privacy is another thing. You want to have, you don't want to have household noise on the air behind you when you're operating on the air. Power is a big consideration. Most homes, in fact, probably all homes, could easily support a simple 100-watt station. But if you're going to start adding amplifiers or an amplifier or multiple radios or an extensive shack like we've got here, you're going to have to go to a 220 service with higher service load capability, like a 200 amp service, which is now standard for all new construction in California. You need a desk, or in my case, multiple desks, or a countertop. Um, One of the easy ways to build a desk is to get a couple of 2-drawer file cabinets and put a door on it. Just lay a door across the top of it. That was my first operating desk as a novice when I was a kid. So that's easy. And again, safety. If your family, you want to isolate your station from, especially from children and infants. And of course, if you have pets, that's always a consideration. You need to have the ability to access outside for your antennas. You have to be able to feed your antennas, and in addition to the antennas, you've got to deal with grounding situations. So we'll talk about grounding a little later on. But there's the other aspect of this is personal comfort, heat, humidity, and dampness. Now, we live in the desert here, so heat is a problem. Humidity, not so much. It's real dry here. We have 5 tons of air conditioning in the ham shack here. They're mini splits, and they're great when they work. And right now they're not working. Something has gone wrong with them in the last couple of days. So anyway, but that's important, personal comfort. It's kind of chilly in here right now. Other considerations, a comfortable chair. I've got a nice recliner here that I use, but you want a chair that you can sit in for extended periods of time. So that's something to think about. You might want to have a separate workshop, like a workbench, so you can do repairs, or if you're going to make antennas or do something like that, you're going to assemble kits. You want a place to be able to work on that in a separate location, not on your desk where your radios are. You need some wall space for things like clocks. Clocks are important. You need to have a clock. 24-hour UTC clock. Actually, the clocks that I have here, in fact, you can see one over my left shoulder back there. That's a digital clock that's fed from a central time code generator. And they're displaying local time, but it's in a 24-hour format. But I could easily change that over to UTC if I wanted. But you might have maps. There's a map on the wall behind me back there, charts. And you might want to display QSL cards. This is an important thing. And of course, any awards that you might have. I've got a wall full of awards over here in the shack. So Anthony has a presentation on that, his QSL presentation that's linked there, that talks about how you can how you deal with QSLs and display them. That's a big part of ham radio. Anymore, it's become all electronic with Logbook of the World, but there are those of us that still like those paper QSL cards. That's kind of a special thing. So you might also want storage for some of your accessories and supplies. I've got a library in their other room here. And of course, we've got to have room for things like paper tablets and pens and pencils that you have to keep around all the time. And of course, you need to have room for a computer generally. And if you've got a computer, you probably want access to the internet. So that's we've got quite a few computers located in here right now. So I just want to mention one thing about displaying QSL cards. If all your cards are electronic and you have pictures like from eQSL, you can have a picture frame that has JPEGs loaded in it, or you can have another monitor. I have a television above my screen here. When I have the shack being used as a guest area, I have a loop of QSL cards to play up there, both scanned paper cards and my digital images. Perfect. That's perfect. So I think that one on the right there is your first one, isn't it?
Yes, it is. This is my first. Well, this is my first case. It actually had a 515 in it. It has a 515 in it now, but for the purposes of this picture, I put a 509 in there just to have it all be white.
Oh, white.
Eggshell,
yeah.
I should say.
Yeah, eggshell. Yeah, good old Tech eggshell. Yes, sir. Oh, that's neat. So,
well, I think I take over now. now.
Okay.
I think so. Yes.
Well, not yet. I think there's 2 more slides I've got here. You should have done this one, but that's okay. I can talk to this. But doing having something, if you don't have room for a shack at home, having something that's portable, that's like a go box, like Anthony's showing here. These are great to be able to just pick the thing up and go outside, set up a portable antenna and have some fun. But it's great for storing the radio. It's great for quick setup and rapid deployment. And it allows you to take your equipment to, as you say here, alternate rooms or remote locations. How about going on vacation? I love taking radios with me on
This is
vacation.
what goes with me right here.
Yep. Yep. So there you go. Now you can go to the next one. So there's other things that you need in your Radio Shack that you're going to frequently interact with. And some of the things we've got here, besides the radio, the rig itself, rotator. If you've got a Yagi antenna on a rotator, you're going to have rotator controls. You're going to have things like a paddles for your, if you're doing Morse code, doing CW. And they need to be easily accessible to you on the desk, on your operating position. Items with less interaction, things like the power supplies, amplifiers, etc., can be not necessarily on the main level. They can be somewhere else. I've got power supplies, like my computer is actually hanging under the desk here. It's not on the floor, but it's on a hanger under the desk. Power supplies, well, the power supplies for this are actually on the floor, this station where I'm at right here. Power supplies for this are on the floor. And it's important. One of the things I see a lot, it's important to have a lot of space on your desktop. You want to have space for a writing pad, if you keep a paper log, a computer keyboard, mouse, your key, and you want to have room to rest your arm on the tabletop. I see stations that they'll have like 6 inches of space in front of the radio on their desk. And, I cannot operate like that. I have to have room. I've got 18 to 24 inches in front of all my radios on the desks. So it gives me lots of room to be able to spread out and have room to rest my arm, especially for doing CW. So, or for tuning, especially, you need to have a comfortable, if you're going to be tuning the radio, you got to have a comfortable position for your arm. Depending on the operator, you might want to have the radio on the right or the left, depending if you're right-handed or left-handed. It's kind of funny because the radio in front of me here is a separate transmitter and receiver. So I've got one on both sides. I am right-handed, so the receiver's on the right. So that's also my good ears. That's where it is. Yeah, sight lines for computer and radio for easy and comfortable viewing. Main computer screen in the center. I've got dual screens on all my computers, and they're situated right above the radio. That's where the computer screen is right in front of me here. The radio is right below it, and that works just great for me. I can have a logging program on one side, and I can have my digital modes on the other side, or WinLink or FT8 or whatever runs on the other screen, or my SDRs.
I see so many people that when they're just starting out, put their radio up above other things, and I think it's really a bad idea. When you want to be able to tune it, it's going to be difficult, and you're going to spend a lot of time with your arm hanging out in the air, and it gets uncomfortable. Yes, and definitely not reaching above your head.
Yeah, you
so
don't
yes.
Something that, in fact, if you look at the station behind me here, it's actually on a little 2-inch riser, and that shows up in I think in the picture in the opening credits of my station. You can see that station is sitting on a riser. Oh, you don't have to go back there.
We'll go back there. There we go.
Yeah, you can see how that station's situated. That's a combination modern and vintage, state-of-the-art and vintage station. That's a Flex 6700 and a couple of vintage radios there. So you can see how I've got that set up. Amplifiers over on the right-hand side, and the Flex plus all the controls for the Flex are there, and power controls there in the left-hand side, a Signal 1 CX11A and a Collins, Rockwell Collins KWM 380 in the middle there on the little riser. And it makes it a lot easier to operate the radio. Plus you got a place where you can slide your keyboard out of the way, which I really like. So I'll let you go first on your shack. Yeah, I'll talk about, this is one part of my Radio Shack. This is one operating position. And this happens to be one of our favorites is AM. We run vintage gear on AM, and you can see a couple of vintage AM broadcast transmitters in the back room there. Through that window, there's actually 3 transmitters back there. There's a mixing console, an old broadcast mixer. That's an old Collins 212B1 mixer. And we've got a receiver there that's an R390A plus patch panels and speech processing equipment and a couple of tape decks, a couple of reel-to-reel tape decks, plus another receiver. But this is actually changed. A lot of this was temporary. A lot of these things have been moved around now and changed. But this is a nice, comfortable operating position. Both my wife and I can sit there and operate this system. There's room for both of us, which makes a difference. but it's a comfy place, and it's really fun to run AM.
So on the right here is my shack, and one of the deals my wife made when she let me move out of the basement was all the repairs and all the workbench had to stay in the basement. So my shack is my operating position. That's where I'm sitting right now. This, you notice I have a little keyboard drawer, so my keyboard can be at a little bit lower height. This keyboard you see in the front here is actually my CW keyboard. It's not my typing keyboard, which is below there. And you might also notice that keyboard has backlit keys on it, and I can change the colors on it, which is nice. It's usually not that bright red. It's usually a green. My main radio is on my right here. It's my Gallicraft K3S, and again, it's on table level. I make a lot of these little risers very similar to what Dennis does to increase my space. This is just, I always, when I find people throwing away cheap desk sets, I always salvage the lumber, and I do these little stands like this. I even do this, bring these to field day, which is nice. So I have my VHF, UHF radios on top there. You can see that I have 3 monitors. This is my second monitor that I use for most things. This is the monitor that I don't turn on all the time, but right now, if you see me looking up, that's looking up at the list of what slides are which, and that's where I display my QSLs. This QSL display here actually holds 400 cards, and you can flip through these different things. And as I said before, save space for those awards. Here's my CQ Worldwide Awards here, and there's another one I haven't put up yet, but I'm running out of room for awards, which is a good thing.
That is a good thing.
And of course, I'm in the Akron area, so I had to have a blimp sending out, using its lights to send CQ as it goes through the night sky.
That's cool.
You're up, Dennis.
Oh, am I up again?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. Oh, yeah, this is all about safety with your antenna.
I'm not safe enough.
You're not safe enough. Well, so you've got your antenna installed. Now you've got to route it into the house and connect it to your radio and connect the power supply to the radio and all that. So one of the things you have to consider is the National Electrical Code, the NEC, as it's referred to. And this is a quote out of the NEC that says, each conductor of a lead-in from an outdoor antenna shall be provided with a listed antenna discharge unit. Now, this is for lightning protection and for static discharge. Remember that you don't have to have a direct hit by lightning to have a discharge in your system. If it's within a certain distance, which can be quite a distance, it can induce current to flow in your antenna and cause high voltages and cause arcing and actually damage your equipment. But you want to keep that stuff outside of the Radio Shack and get it routed to ground. So outdoor antenna discharge unit, we'll talk a little bit about that. We've got a slide coming up. These are typical, what you'd call ADUs, and that one on the right-hand side, I've got a bunch of those, polyphasers. Those are really a great unit. They're for getting rid of static discharge, lightning, any type of a static discharge or an impulse on your antenna. These will route it, and they're really the standard of the industry, even in commercial. They've been around for a long time. You could get them for all the way from low frequencies all the way up into the microwave bands. And I'm not sure what that other one is. Is that one from like DX Engineering or something?
I don't know who. That's one from this was one from our VHF presentation. So this slide was one that was in here.
Slides. Yeah, yes. I don't recognize that one, but typically these things have like a gas discharge tube in them, and the one on the left, if the thing gets hit, you can actually replace the gas discharge tube.
These are the ones that Marty uses, and I can't remember the name of it. The name is on the bottom, and I think it's German.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I'm not sure, but anyway, these are good examples of the ways to protect your feed-in. And it says, National Electric Code says ADU to be located as near as practical to the entrance of the conductors to the building and grounded in accordance with 810.21. So this is a good illustration. Here's your antenna up on the roof. You've got coax coming down to that discharge unit, and then the lead in going into your radio. It's going to a ground rod, and that ground rod is not by itself. You don't just drive a rod into the ground. It's tied back to your existing ground for your home that's provided at your service entrance for your power service entrance is grounded. That's that existing home ground rod. And those two things are bonded together by a fairly heavy piece of cable. So that's a perfect example of how to do this. They need to be connected together. This is the so-called single point ground. Now it's called a single point because it's electrically a single point. It may be distributed over hundreds of feet, but it's a single point ground. And if you take a look at this picture, you can see the polyphaser ADU there at the bottom, and you've got a coax coming in, coax going out, and it's going to a clamp that goes to a ground rod. And if you look on the ground rod, you can see two very, very large conductors, and that's your ground, tying the ground, bonding the grounds together. So you might have multiple ground rods. In fact, you should have multiple ground rods, and they're all bonded together with a heavy cable like that. And that's some pretty heavy cable.
And this picture is looking down to the ground. This isn't the wall. Yeah.
It looks like it's foundation. Now, the one thing that's wrong, I will state that the one thing that's wrong with this picture, I like the way it's installed, except this looks like a foundation wall at the bottom of the picture. It should not be that close to the foundation. That ground rod needs to be at least half of its length away from the ground, from the foundation. Well, maybe that's only a foot long ground rod, but a typical 8-foot ground rod,
I think it's longer than that.
Needs to be like 4 feet away from a foundation. It needs to be away from the foundation. Otherwise, it's ineffective. All right. Okay. So now where you enter into your Radio Shack, that's the picture on the left. This is a typical system that I don't know who this belongs to, Anthony, but it's done nicely. This is the way you want to do it. A copper plate, like you see there. The straps, the one going up. I can't tell if that's a strap or a stud.
That's a stud there. That's like a floor joist, actually.
Yeah, it's a floor, like a post there or something. But the copper strap going down, this is real typical of the way you want to do this. That's your connection to not only your ground rod, but also on the right is a grounding system for your radio. So your radios tie back into this, and you can see the copper strap coming into the left side of that plate, the copper plate, and you can see ground wires going to lugs on that plate. And that looks like something might be from Georgia Copper. That's a great source if you're not familiar with it. I just saw Peter's comment. Yes, that's right. Yeah, Mike. But yeah, the Georgia Copper is a great source for copper, for grounding strap, copper strap, grounding plates. They have a lot of systems like that they manufacture, and put in a plug for those guys. So there's two types of grounding that we talk about, and the one that I'm primarily interested in, of course, is the safety ground. That's that electrical ground, and it's for safety for a number of reasons. One is for lightning, static discharge, that type of thing, but it also deals with faults in your equipment. One of the things you want to be wary of is, and it's the reason for having that single point ground with all of your equipment grounded to it. Should the hot lead of a piece of equipment touch the chassis, that can potentially put play on words, no pun intended, potentially put 120 volts on the chassis of your radio, and you really don't want that. And what you want to have happen is that if that occurs, you want to blow a circuit breaker. And the only way that can happen is if you have a single point ground. So the piece of equipment is tied back to your electrical service entrance, and not just a post or a ground rod driven into the ground outside your Radio Shack. What'll happen is there'll be so much resistance between that ground rod and the one back at the electrical service, you'll never draw enough current to blow the circuit breaker. And that's a real common problem. So local regulations, local building codes, those are the things you want to adhere to for any new stuff that you're doing, electrical especially. But that's foremost, is electrical safety in the ham shack, first and foremost. RF grounding is a different thing, and there's so many dependencies. We could cover that in an entire presentation here. Yeah.
And there's a video here that I have a link to. This is
an ad.
Yes, of course it is. It's Ward Silver's grounding presentation he did to the Front Range 6-meter group.
This is a great presentation. He's done this for us on RATPAC as well. Ward was here for us too, and he's got a book that published by the ARRL, and it's a great resource. I urge everyone to get a copy of that, have that on hand. Anyway, yeah, and another person we're familiar with, Steve Katz, WB2WIK, who's no longer Portable 6. He's now in 5 land. He's in Florida. and we're trying to get him to come and speak for us here.
Actually, he's in Foreland, I think.
What's that?
I think he's in
Yeah, that's right. I
Foreland.
said 5. I meant, yeah, Foreland. I'm sorry. He's in Florida. Duh. Slip of the tongue. Yeah, he is in Foreland. He's in Florida, but so now he's portable 4. But he's got some great things that he's written on grounding and a lot of correspondence. I've been following him for years on sites like eHam, and ran into him years ago when there was still a Usenet mail, the UUCP mail system around, and he was on one of the groups there. So there you go. That's some great resources for grounding. All right. So now you're building your station, and here's the first challenge you're going to run into. You want to put up an antenna, but you live in an area where you've got a homeowners association with HOAs, right? And local zoning that says no outside antennas allowed. Okay. Or your property's too small to fit your antenna. That's a common thing. If you're on a city lot, you can't put up much of a big antenna, or can you? There's some ways to get around that. You might not have any property rights at all for rights to be able to put up antennas. You might be in a high-rise apartment. You might be in an apartment. You might be in a rental house. You may be able to obtain permission to do so, but you may not. So what do we do? What do we do here? So there's some good solutions. One is temporary, and I've done this in the past when I've been in a rental house. I've put up temporary systems that are not permanently attached to anything and can be easily taken down, and they work quite well. If you're in an HOA, stealth or hidden antennas are always an option. I like flagpoles. If your HOA will let you put up a flagpole, you can turn that flagpole into a nice vertical antenna and do it that way. Indoor antennas. We've talked in the past about putting dipoles in your attic. If you have access to an attic, you can put wire antennas in the attic. I've seen VHF and UHF antennas installed in attics. Of course, the limitation is if you have any metal roofing or any kind of metal like foil insulation or anything that's on the roof, it's going to act like a shield and you're not going to be able to get out. But if your roof is all wood and shingles or shakes or tiles or whatever, that can work pretty well. It's a compromise. It's not going to be as effective as a dipole quarter wavelength up in the air, but it'll still work, and you'll still work stations. Of course, the other option is to go more mobile or portable. Many of us run mobile stations. We run both my wife and I have mobile stations in our cars. Portable, like you do on field day, having a portable station that you can take. But one of the things that's become more popular lately, and it's with the advent of a lot of the newer radios, is remote HF stations. So you can put a remote station somewhere else where you don't have those restrictions, and you can connect to it over the internet and run your radio that way. And that's a real easy way to get around it. So take it away, Anthony. It's your turn.
Well, thank you, Dennis. You've already seen this chart if you were here last week. This is the chart from the Villages Amateur Radio Club. There's a lot of HOAs in the area where they live, so they put together a little chart grading different antennas on an A through F scale for on-the-air activity, stealthness, whether it needs a tuner, installation, cost, and different bands. So they have a whole list here. This document is available on their website. You can click on it. This takes you out to that website and gives you more information on this presentation that was done on antennas. Flagpole antenna that Dennis mentioned earlier. Here's information on flagpole antennas. And we have end-fed antennas. Sometimes you only have one end that you can do something with, and that's the way you can run a very stealth thin wire from your house out to some other area. So dipole antennas, again, these are all resources. A lot of these are from the Villages, but they're from other sources also. And remember that there's that whole section last week that we covered with antenna information. The second challenge for HF is limited mode and frequency allocations. And this takes place when you first get your license. When you get your technician class license, you really have limited HF. We talked about this the first week. You have HF on CW on 80, 40, and 15. On 10 meters, you do have some single sideband capability. But unlike what they do in the UK, where they give you all the frequencies and reduce the power, here in the US, we limit your modes and frequencies for the technician class license. So that can be a problem for people. They might need to upgrade to be able to get on the air and utilize all the bands. The other problem sometimes is crowded bands or dead bands, and I hear people complain about both, and I hear the same people, the people complaining on the same day, so I don't take that to heart very much. The bands will definitely be crowded this week because it's the CQ Worldwide Phone Contest. If you don't like it, go to the work bands. There's plenty of space to work, so don't let dead or crowded bands ever stop you from getting on the air. So, as I mentioned earlier, some possible solutions: upgrade your license to extra, and that gives you access to all the allocations. Learn Morse code and be able to use the CW allocations. That gives you a lot more space. So don't limit yourself to just one mode or one band. Put up antennas for and try out additional bands, including 160 in the work band. You're going to hear many people tell you that there's no way you can put a 160 antenna on your property. I have one on my small lot here. It's only 60 foot long, and it's coming off a tower, so it only takes up about 40 foot of horizontal space. And I've worked all states with it and 70 or 80 DXCC entities with it.
Nice.
Try out FT8 and FT4 and other digital modes. They work with antennas that aren't quite as great. So if you're stuck with that balcony antenna or that indoor antenna, try FT8, FT4. So let's talk a little bit now about our next topic, and that's computers in the Radio Shack. And there's a whole presentation that I just did on computers and amateur radio for RATPAC a couple weeks ago, so that's available. It was actually, this was actually written before I did that at the last minute, so I'll point you to that in a few minutes. So there's a lot of uses for computers in the Radio Shack. As a matter of fact, I first got into computers back in the early 90s. I never had any experience with computers, but I decided I wanted to keep a computerized log. So I actually got started learning about computers, and it actually caused me to change careers and a bunch of things. So whenever the kids complained about amateur radio, I reminded them that that's the reason that they got fed, because it got me into my job. Food is always the way to that for teenage boys. Food is a very, very important thing. If you're going to operate digital modes, some of them require a computer to be able to encode and decode those. As I mentioned, logging contacts is what I want to do. And even though a log is not required, I strongly recommend a log. And I have a whole presentation talking about computer logging software and the reasons why you should consider logging. I also had an article in CQ Magazine. The September issue was all about logging in the Ham Radio Explorer column that I write. If you do contesting, you want to keep your log on a computer. You don't want a paper log for a contest. Because you're going to make too many contacts and you're going to have to convert it to a computer log anyway to send it in. So just bite the bullet. If you want to contest, you'll really benefit from having a computer in the shack. I use it for QSLing of both electronic and also printing out cards when I'm sending them out. I have pre-printed color cards, but I print all the information on them using my logging software. Helps you find stations. I have another screen over here has the logging clusters up on it and showing me incoming things. I just noticed this evening that there's a number of stations on getting ready for the contest, and I actually worked a couple of those a little earlier. So one of the things that you're going to be involved with is interfacing your radio to your computer to be able to utilize these great programs, and that's called CAT control. Computer assisted computer interface is called CAT. It could also be used for programming the radio, even if you're not keeping it connected all the time. You might have an HT that you're programming with a computer. It's a lot easier. You might need to upgrade firmware on computers, both HF and VHF and UHF. Almost all computers now, firmware is a really important aspect, so being able to do that is going to require a computer. If you're running any of the digital sound card modes, the audio in, audio out from the radio is something you're going to need to interface. And this can be done in a couple different ways, either build in sound card in the radio, or you can use a interface device such as a signal link or something along those lines. Accessories that you might want to control. You might want to control your rotator when you put a station in your log. You can have it automatically tune the rotator, or you can have a tuner that's adjusted by the computer. As far as CAT interfacing, to use earlier rigs, I'm sorry, to use these earlier rigs with new computers that only have USB and no RS-232 on the computer, you usually need a USB to RS-232 adapter cable. And there's two gender styles. There's one with pins, there's one with sockets on it, depending on whether you have a Yaesu or whether you have an older Kenwood. So if you still have an older radio and you need to interface it, and you need a USB to serial adapter, I suggest you find one that has a ferrite suppressors on it. And I'd also suggest you find one that uses an FTDI USB control chip in it. Don't get the prolific ones. More stuff, and I'm going to skip over a couple of these slides because I'm going to point you to the information on the whole presentation that we did for RATPAC just recently. But basically, the difference between an older radio that doesn't have a sound card built in and one that does means that you need extra cables. So if you want to run FT8 or any of the sound card modes, not only do you need rig control, but you'd also need some kind of sound card interface. On newer radios, that one USB cable handles both the rig control and the audio, and it also handles the push to talk. So it's actually doing three things. And there's a variety of different sound card interfaces available either in the radio, as I said earlier, or separately. And they can be used for all the digital sound card modes. They can also be used for traditional modes such as RTTY. There's computer programs to do that. So there's a lot of different things you can do. Here's an example of a sound card interface. And I know I'm skipping over some of these slides because I want to point you to this presentation. This presentation, tiny.cc AR contest, is the slideshow presentation. And the YouTube is available from the site. And I got the wrong link here. I'll fix that link.
That's the wrong link.
It's the wrong. It's not only the wrong link, but it's actually even typed the wrong link in there. So it should actually be AR computer. Is what it should say there. So I'll fix that before we post the slides, and that'll get you out. Hopefully, this is probably going to go the wrong place also. So I'll just type it in tiny.cc/AR computer. There we go. Hit friendly little face operating as ICOM 7300. So there's a whole presentation on a variety of things with computers and interfacing and all the information you want. And if you watch the YouTube video, there's actually 8 slides I've added since then that talk about interfacing multiple radios to a single computer and using multiple computers with different programs. So there's a bunch of information in there on the computers in the Radio Shack. I also have a presentation on FT8 and FT4 if you're interested in more information on those. I have a presentation on information on WinLink, and then another resource for other digital sound card modes. These two are not links that I did. This is the FT8 slideshow and video that I presented a number of times for different clubs. Computer logging no longer required by the FCC, but there's many reasons to keep a log of your contacts. And I have a whole presentation, logging software and general contesting. And again, there's a link to the slideshow and a link to the recorded video of this presentation. That link is actually the correct one. Now I'll make sure the other one gets fixed. So there's a bunch of information. And this is what a logbook looked like for many years. Although this logbook is not typical. Well, it is. Notice that originally the FCC required, this is a particular person that isn't part of the FCC, but they required you to put in when you were CQing, even if you didn't get an answer. And this is actually a log from England. So a bunch of information on logging and computer logging is available in that slideshow presentation. So what I'm going to do now is, let's see, turn it back to Dennis and talk about connectors.
Oh, and all kinds of stuff. The things that other things that you're going to need for your station, all the other stuff you need. So coax, we talked about coax last week, but some of the stuff you'll need if you start adding accessories like a watt meter or directional watt meter, SWR meter, switches, you're going to need jumpers. and you can buy them commercially made, or you can make them yourself. They're not that hard to make if you just take the time to learn how to do it. Short lengths of coax to connect your rig to all these external things like a tuner or that power meter, the directional watt meter, SWR meter. And if you look around my station, I got all kinds of stuff connected up. You can see my rat's nest of jumper cables back there in that rack. So yeah, those are important. The other thing is adapters. We do have a lot of different kinds of connectors that we use. So it's good to have a good collection of adapters on hand, especially for, like you say here, UHF and BNC type connectors, being able to adapt those together. UHF, of course, those are the most common things we use on HF, but BNC connectors do get used. I've got some equipment here with BNC connectors on it. BNC to SMA, that's probably more likely to be used on a handheld radio or something. But it's important to have a good selection of these things. Barrel connectors are great if you need a longer piece of coax. You know, that cable stretcher just those things just don't exist. Well, they do in the laboratory, but in the ham shack they don't exist. So so you need to have a way to maybe splice a couple of pieces of coax together. Barrel connectors are just the ticket. So you can join two PL259s together. And if you've got more than one antenna and a single feed line, you can use an AB switch to switch those antennas between your radio. Or if you've got multiple antennas or multiple radios, you can switch between radios too. And that's what all this does next to me here, is switching between multiple antennas and multiple radios. So that AB switches or multi-position switches, those are great. But don't get good quality.
Yes, definitely.
Don't buy cheap AB switches, those little coax switches, the ones that come from Taiwan and that kind of thing.
Truck stop switches are to be avoided at all costs.
Yeah, because they're bad. They don't provide much isolation, and they tend to not be very reliable. I strongly believe in the stuff from Alpha Delta. They're expensive.
Right up there.
Yeah. There's 6 of them in this rack right here, and I get some old B&W rotary switches off of eBay. And there's a bunch of those. There's like 6 of those in this rack too. So those are multi-position switches or rotary switches. So they're really, really great for that, for switching antennas and radios and what have you. But get good quality. You won't regret it. Tools are always an important thing to have around. Soldering iron, basic stuff, soldering iron, solder, maybe even some solder wick, or a desoldering tool of some kind. Wire strippers, another very important thing to have around, and pliers, regular pliers, needle nose pliers, side cutters, flush cutters, you know, that like is illustrated there. Those are great tools to have. You want to have them in your shack. You might want to have a crimper or and connectors to go with it for either coax or like power, the Anderson power poles. Having an Anderson power pole, they make a special crimper for the power poles, and those are a handy tool to have. Although I will confess, I broke mine the other day.
And on coax crimpers, just remember you have to get the die heads for the specific type of coax you're using.
That's right, yeah. Because different diameter coax, and they may look alike. They may look like they're the same size, but they might not be quite the same size, and what crimps one will not crimp the other one correctly. So be cautious of that. And I do like crimp connectors. They work really well. I've adopted that for all of my internal connections inside the shack now. So wire and coax, we covered that. Electrical tape, for waterproofing, for insulation, safety insulation, what have you. There's some really great stuff out there that's available. They call self-vulcanizing tape. So it becomes a real good weatherproof cover. And the proof is in when you try and take the stuff off. It's almost impossible to remove because it adheres to itself so well. And of course, screwdrivers, all kinds of different screwdrivers. I have quite a few screwdriver sets, multiple bits, interchangeable bits. I have just drawers full of that stuff. It's useful to have. So you never know when you might need it.
Now we're going to pause now for a short ad because
Okay.
RATPAC will be providing a holiday gift ideas presentation on December 7th. It's going to be members of the RATPAC Planning Committee, and we're going to be talking about some of the suggestions. So you might want to invite your significant others to that December 7th meeting, or give them the link to the recording, and we'll talk about some things for so that you don't end up with the wrong Christmas gifts.
Yep. All right, test equipment. Yeah, that's essential. We actually had a presenter on here, Wayne Yoshida, KH6WZ, did a talk on RATPAC some months ago called "No Tools Troubleshooting," and you might want to take a look at that. It's a good video, a good talk, and he does talk about basic tools like a VOM or a multimeter. So you can use that to measure voltage and resistance, things like that. Continuity testing. It looks like what we call the LRM from Harbor Freight, the little red needle.
Yes.
The LRM. So anyway, those are useful tools to have. Things like that. That's your basic stuff. You could get a lot more sophisticated. But there's another aspect of ham radio, and this goes way back. And I can thank some folks that I knew when I was a kid that were my mentors. And mentoring is essential to learning more about ham radio. It's someone who can help answer questions and definitely avoid the pitfalls of the hobby. Yeah, they can answer questions about what radio to buy, what they can loan you tools like an antenna analyzer. If you're having trouble understanding a particular concept, the mentors are there to help with that. If you don't already have a mentor, find one or more mentors. Like I say, when I was a kid, I had 4. One of them was my namesake, Chet Titcomb, W6DQ, who of course is now a silent key, unfortunately, but he was one of my mentors when I was in high school. Where do you find a mentor? That's a good question. And of course, clubs are a great place. The first place you might look is a club. And of course, you can go to the ARRL website and look under their club link there that Anthony's bringing up, club records for ARRL affiliated clubs. And of course, QRZ has another page for doing the same thing for finding clubs. But yeah, you put in your zip code and it'll tell you all the clubs that were within a certain distance of your location.
Actually, just don't put anything beside your zip code in.
Yeah, just put your zip code in, yeah. But it's great. That's a great resource at the league. It's like there are, stop my phone. QRZ.com has a link for clubs. Again, let's see what states they don't have. I don't know. I don't really use that one, so you're more familiar with it than I am.
Well, the nice thing about this is the ARRL site only has affiliated clubs, so this actually has more clubs in it.
All the clubs, yeah, that they know.
So these are all the clubs in Ohio, for example. Big
list. So those are good places to start to look for a mentor.
And one of the things that Dennis mentioned was about having more than one mentor. And I definitely agree with that. I have a mentor I would go to when I need antenna advice, and I have a mentor I would go to when I would need advice on repairs. So having different mentors can be a great way to go.
And I'll tell you, even after, and you just made the comment there, after being in amateur radio for how many years now, coming up on 53 years that I've been in ham, I still have mentors, people that I go to discuss questions and what have you. I do mentor others, and I love doing that. I love sharing what knowledge I have. I freely share that. And it's one of the joys of ham radio to me, is giving back to the amateur community. And that's why we do things like this right here. It's part of mentoring. So there you go. All right, Anthony.
I was sort of thinking I teach a lot of classes, and I thought it'd be really nice if I could pass on something to people that just got their license. And this sort of grew out of something my nephew, W8AKR, David, got his license, and I thought, I'm going to put together just a little short document for him with information on what to do when you get your license. Well, as usual, when I start a document, it becomes It just has a life of its own. So what I did is I backed up and talked about getting your license. So this document is not only for once you have your license, but you can hand this to someone that doesn't have a license. It talks about taking the test, but then the part that it really goes into is what do you do after you pass the test? And I talk about finding clubs, the things you'll need in your shack, like a band chart frequency allocations, like we showed in week 1. How to print out an official or unofficial copy of your license to post on the wall or to carry in your wallet. Joining the ARRL, subscribing to magazines, putting together your station, resources on new stations, learning best practices, links to my web pages, a number of different amateur radio news, blogs, podcasts, videos, YouTubes, etc. I don't have RATPAC on here because I put this together before that. I'll make sure I add RATPAC to this group.
You add RATPAC.
Mailing list that you might want to join. And then I have information on other activities you can try, because when you first get started out, you don't even know what other activities you want to try. And then I have an addendum on free software and contesting resources, manufacturers, vendors. And this is something that we give a link to whenever we do our VE testing. When someone passes their test, we give them this little piece of paper that has this link on it they can type in, or they can shoot the QR code, and it brings them to that little quick start link.
Anthony, that's a great resource.
Yeah, so it's just something I put together, and it actually, you can blame my nephew David. And it was interesting when he first got his license and he had his general, he'd come by the house to operate, and he'd be on the phone portions of the band, and I would never remember where the general ended and the extra began as he was moving down the band. And I always would have to look because I hadn't done that for a long time. I had an extra so long, and he called me a couple weeks later and said, "I took care of that problem, Uncle Anthony. I passed my extra, so I don't have to worry about that anymore." So let's talk about HF as a group project. So if you've liked what we've talked about here and you know some people, maybe people in your club aren't really up on HF, they're more into VHF and repeaters and things like that, think about getting them exposure to HF. And what we did with our local club is we created a net that replaced our original Monday night net. We used to have a Monday night we still have a VHF UHF net, but after that we had a 10-meter net. And it was getting sort of old, and everyone had been there, done that. So a couple years I suggested to the club we start a band exploration net. And the idea of what was every Monday for the net, we would use a different band. So we stayed with 2 bands that were available to technicians, 6 meters and 10 meters, so that we wouldn't be eliminating people from the club process. But then we started using some other bands so people get an idea of what they were like. So we have a 40-meter band. This is actually the most problematic, and I would probably rethink this, because 40 meters is just a little bit too long most of the times for us, and it's a little too noisy and crowded. 80 meters is great for local stuff, so we had that. And when there's a 5th Monday available, like there's going to be this month, during the winter time we use 160. During the summertime we choose 12 meters or 17 meters. And this was great because this was the first time many people ever got on 160, the first time many people got on 17. And we actually had people in our club saying, "Hey, I'd like to get on this thing, but I don't have an antenna for that band. Could you help me out with an antenna?" So it was a great way to expose people to this. And you could easily do something like this with your club. You could expand the number of bands you're doing. You could just do a work bands. You could do a 17, 12 meter, 30 meter, 60 meter net if you wanted to. So please feel free to steal this idea from us. As I said earlier, we kept 2 bands that were available to technicians. What we also did is we even encouraged anyone in the club, whether they were technicians or whatever class they were, if they didn't have a radio for that band, to use the online software-defined radios that we talked about earlier so they could listen in. So we weren't going to eliminate anyone from being able to listen, even if they weren't able to transmit on that particular band. So the next thing is, we've talked to you about a lot of things, and you might say, "I need some more information." So I put together the 3 books that I think are most important for a new ham. And you'll notice that the handbook is not one of these listed here, because I think the handbook is a great resource, but what we want to focus on is getting you on the air. And I think these are 3 books that are the best ones for getting on the air. Your first HF station, the AWR Operator's Manual, and I actually also like the RSGB Operator's Manual even better, and I have one of those on the shelf over here. Ham Radio for Dummies, I mentioned earlier, it's a great Ward Silver book, lots of good information. If you're looking for videos, these are the three YouTubers that I sort of prefer. They're not as flashy, although Josh is a little bit in the ham radio course, but Dave Kassler and KB9 VBR have very down-to-earth, good videos you can watch. They're not just sitting there drinking beer and chatting. They're actually making stuff and doing things. And then finally, if you'd like to share all the resources over the last 3 weeks, I actually put together a little article for our local club's newsletter, and you're more than welcome to take that. And it basically talks about everything we've done. Here's the link to it. You feel free to go in and go to file and make a copy, and then you can adjust it for exactly what you want. But it basically talks about the VHF, UHF class we did in July, Marty and I, and then it gives what we talked about. It talks about the HF, and I'll add the last link here after tonight's recording is posted. It talks about what Dennis and I have done over the last 3 weeks with an outline of all the topics we covered. And this is something you can share with people. You know, send it to your newsletter editor. They're always looking for articles, and this would be a great article for them to have so they can access all 6 of the videos and both of the slideshow sets for the VHF, UHF, and the HF section. All the links will be right here. They can just click on them and watch them. So that brings us to the end of, I think we're at slide 153 of our 3-part series. If you need a PDF, you can click on this link, but remember the PDF will be out of date immediately because I will keep adding to this. Dennis and I are going to take this on the road. We've been invited to do this for Denby Dales in the UK, so we're going to do November, December, and January. We're going to have to modify it a little bit for the UK because there's a few differences on HF there, and it's always fun to do that. I did the technician one that I did for the US. I did a foundation version of it for the UK, so we'll be taking this on the road. So what we'll do is we'll invite questions. I'll leave this up on the screen for a few minutes if you want to shoot that. But before we do that, I just want to go down past there. Again, our contact information is available. And then also all my slideshows are available. If your local club would like me to do a presentation, I've done over 275 presentations since the beginning of COVID. And I'm trying to get present all states. So if you have a state that I haven't presented, I'd love to do that. Click on this link. Take a look at my presentations. Most of the slideshows are there. Some recordings of them are available. And if you need me to modify one, I'll be happy to do that. I'm going to be doing my Trains in Amateur Radio live and in person with my wife, Linda K8ODP, at the Fort Wayne Hamfest. So if you're going to be at the Fort Wayne Hamfest in a couple weeks, I'm going to be doing one live there. But I'd be happy to do a presentation for your club. So I'll leave this up here if you want to shoot the QR code or get the link for tonight's presentation, and we'll go ahead and take questions. So you can type things in the chat, or you can raise your hand and Dan will acknowledge you. And I'm going to take the share down so I can bring this in front and actually look at you all, your smiling faces. And we can breathe.
Yes. And now we're looking for questions. That was a great presentation, guys.
Thank you, Dan.
I know we didn't go quite as long as last time. We're sorry. Okay.
Look at the time. It's 1900 local.
We still have a half an hour left then, so good. Okay.